What is up, beautiful human? I hope you're doing well. I am doing pretty good myself. I still have beaten the seasonal depression for this year so far. There's so many things in life that I think are just mental tricks. And one I wanted to talk about today, it's not really a mental trick, but it's how our body is communicating with us all the time. I've probably for the last 7 months or so, I've been paying more attention to my body. And I feel kind of sad. I feel like I've been neglecting my body, listening to the cues that it gives and not really taking that as wisdom or as a full truth. I think it's easier to intellectualize things, sit in the cockpit in our minds. I've talked about that before. It feels like I'm just like this little driver up there, steering the ship. But our body holds a lot of wisdom. Before we had language, what did we have to go by? Our bodies, intuition. So it's as ancient as it gets, right? And I think we can dismiss our body. I think also, too, we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves because it's kind of programmed into us, right? Like from a young age, you're taught to sit still in class, don't move around, be quiet when you're told to be quiet and all that stuff. So it's not necessarily our fault, but it is our responsibility to figure out what's happening. So what I've noticed, and this is just, it's one of those things that is like so apparent, but we forget over time. Like right now, if you were to think about a time you had to do any sort of public speaking, you're probably like me, you get all nervous, you get shaky, you feel your body completely close off right into this to protect yourself. It's almost like you're going into your shell if you were a turtle, right? Putting your head in and like waiting for whatever is going through to pass. And that's the feeling. You feel it so intensely, you become so constricted. And then when it's done, you slowly ease up, but you might be in that tense state for a while. And you can think of other times, when you're having fun, when you're playing, or even with, you see someone you love, you like open up your arms, right? There's like this expansiveness that comes when we're playing, when we're in flow, when we dance, when we walk or do anything with our bodies, right? There's this energetic opening that we feel. It's because we're feeling good, right? Everything's in harmony. And I think it's interesting, learning to pay attention to the signals our body gives and what we can do to help ease when we are in these states of fear. It almost feels like when we're listening to fear and we're caught up in fear, it's almost like all of the possibilities kind of narrow down into a single point, right? And it's to avoid whatever perceived danger or threat, or to mull over, right? To get through it, or to people please in these situations, right? To placate, to get out of the situation. So there's a variety of responses we can have, freeze, fight, fawn. I think those are the main ones. And it's what we do, right? But what I noticed is we can kind of not circumvent. You definitely want to honor what you're feeling and like gauge the situation. But I think we do ourselves a disservice by not taking that as wisdom, right? We can get into a place where we're kind of dismissing what's happening in our body because it's not comfortable, right? If you're triggered by something and something, feels dangerous, like it's very vulnerable. It may be too vulnerable depending on the situation to be like, hey, I feel like I'm in danger right now, to say these words, like, let's say you were like talking with a friend and you get triggered. How real would it be if you were like, hey, I feel like I'm in danger. I might seem calm, cool, and collected on the outside, but internally, my heart is racing because of how closer we could get, together. If the other person too could hold that space, right? Hold that space, which doesn't exist in fear, right? When you're too caught up in fear, there's no space. Again, it's like this constriction in our body. There's no space to communicate, to think differently. What we get into is these like habitual patterns, right? But what I've noticed is if we can create a little space before we react, we can change the patterns. If we give a little space in our body, we can start allowing things to move better. If we're in fear, we're normally not breathing right? Everything becomes super constricted. Our breathing becomes very shallow. We tense up. And one way to help us out of that is to start creating space, whether it's space away from the perceived danger, whether it's space within our bodies, breathing deeper, telling ourselves that we are okay. If it's not an actual threat and we're reacting because we have trauma and triggers, if we can create a little space, whether through breathing, through taking time away if needed, or through just creating that mental space before we react, or that space to react differently, right? That starts allowing things to shift and to change and to start flowing. You know, I think there's this spaciousness that if we can cultivate within ourselves in these different areas, then we can start holding that space for others. And it becomes this beautiful thing. I've seen it in my life, you know, and I can do that for myself. And I think one piece I have been missing is the body aspect, right? Is what's happening in my body. I think for so long, and, you know, I've done a lot of research in psychology and, you know, PTSD, CPS, you know, complex trauma, all that stuff, because I resonate with that, right? I resonate with having unhealthy, unsupportive environments growing up that were riddled with trauma, abuse, neglect, anger, you know, all these things. So when I look at myself, and I hope you do the same, look at yourself through the lens of compassion, you start putting these pieces together. It's like, okay, why does it feel like I'm sitting in the cockpit of my mind? Why also does it feel like it's little me in there? Like intuitively, it feels like a smaller version of me. And you sit with that, right? When you have compassion, you sit with these things more. You create that space to let insights, revelations, and the unraveling of unhealthy patterns emerge. But you can't do that without first creating that space, right? But yeah, I started asking myself, like, what is that? And it's like, oh, it makes sense, you know? Using my mind to research things, it's like, oh, if you're in, you know, a really bad environment and you can't cope, what you are going to do is you are going to get yourself in your mind and out of your body, because you cannot feel the pain. Like, it's too much. You will feel what you can and you'll shove the rest away for later. You'll hold it in your body. It'll become rhythms and patterns that will be ignited again in similar situations, similar triggers, similar things, right? And so we intellectualize, because if you can intellectualize, well, you know, I'm however old I am, I won't have to live in this environment for long, right? You count down 5 years or whatever. You're like, I'll be out of here. I'll be fine. I'm good. You intellectualize your pain, which doesn't give your pain what it wanted to begin with, a space to be held, felt, and understood. So we end up, right, dismissing ourselves because the people around us dismiss us. And then we get all weird, you know, you get weird like me, where, you know, you feel like you're fragmented and you just want to become whole. And maybe that happens when you're in your 30s like me. Maybe that happens later in life. Maybe you don't get to later life because it's so jumbled and you just can't take it anymore. And that's a real reality, right? That's a real situation that happens to many people in life. It becomes too much to handle, and no proper tools, and no way to unravel all this. You know, it feels like a lifelong thing. It's like, is this stuff ever going to leave me? Am I ever going to overcome these things? It feels that way. You know, it feels that way at times, but what I'm noticing, and that's why I like to share here, you know, these different things that I'm going through, definitely a crazy season in life, but one that I'm very grateful for, one of a lot of spiritual growth, of a lot of self-compassion. I'm so grateful, you know? But yeah, if you're anything like me, if you get stuck in your head, you probably do. It's probably why you like some of my videos. I intellectualize a lot, right? It's a lot of fun to do that. I found a lot of worth in being intellectual, right? I get validated at work. I get compensated for my ability to intellectualize things and to problem solve and to figure out the issues. But, you know, it's when you're dealing with yourself and this human condition and this human experience, you got to realize, like, if you don't like your reality, it's probably your operating system. What's going on? It's hardly ever, everything is just reflecting back to you where you still have pain, where you have love and potential as well, but oftentimes where you have pain so you can grow. I find that we're like pulled. You might notice this, you might not, but I feel like we're literally pulled toward the things that are meant to heal us. It's like a subconscious pull. It feels like I felt possessed before, like moving toward things. And I've done it enough now, and I've honored it enough that I realize that it's for my highest good. It's for my growth. And it's hardly ever what I think it is, You could think like, oh, I'm being pulled toward this thing or this person because of XYZ, this like fantasy, right? This delusion. And you got to be willing to be open to whatever will unfold, Because when we cling, I think that's fear. I think fear wants to control the show and the narrative. It wants to say, if you feel pulled towards someone, that this is some magical encounter. I think I fall prey to this a lot. It's like, okay, if I'm pulled, to someone, and this has happened a lot in romantic relationships as an example, I will feel completely pulled, and I want it to be, right, this magical thing, right, that I want it to be what I want it to be, and I have to remind myself, and I've gotten a lot better at this, but I have to remind myself that this pull, I need to be inquisitive about it, right? I need to figure out what's going on and be open to whatever lessons will happen. But this can happen with other things too. I felt really pulled, although it was going against what my intellectual mind wanted. I felt really pulled to move here to Oregon, where I live now. And I didn't really want to, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to talk to family more, where it's very tumultuous. Like at the time, it was not good. There was a lot of drama too, because I'd lost a sibling. It was a lot of like, okay, if I do this, I have to open an old wound, basically, to rely a little bit on family to not screw me over, which they have in the past multiple times. So what does that mean? But I felt pulled, it was like, it's like now when I feel this pull to do things, I just trust it. I just let it happen, because it's not always the prettiest. There's usually a lot of like working through things that I haven't yet, but it's for my highest good if I just listen. But what I will say is, when we go back to the body and what I was talking about previously, is like love, universal energy, God, whatever you want to call it, it can't move through you unless you create space for it to do so. If you're completely closed off in fear or in pushing everything away that's meant for your highest good, you won't be able to allow space for healing. You'll just stay stuck, frozen. So there might be a way we can go around these things, because the mental things become almost like, it's almost too hard to get through the mental, intellectual thing, because you always want to be right. You always want to think you know what's best. But I don't think we ever do. I think if we're real with ourselves, we don't ever really know what's best for us. And if you do, I think that's amazing. I cannot say the same. Everything I've thought would be best for me, and I've moved through that energy and forced it, more or less, has not been for me. But when I let go and I release and I create that space in my thinking and my processing, now learning to do that in my body, it creates this channel that can be opened realistically for love and light and flow to come in, right? I think all of life is always giving us opportunities to increase our capacity for love. I think that is literally why we're here, to get back to a place of homeostasis within ourselves, to get through all of the conditioning and programming and fear. All of that is not real. And illusions or something too. I'm trying to be mindful. I have 40 seconds left on my storage here. So I guess what I'll end with is, try to pay attention to what's happening in your body. It has so much wisdom for you. It has so much wisdom for you. And if we listen to that, I think we honor ourselves on maybe a plane that we haven't been as much as we could. It's easier to honor emotions and the mental stuff, but I think creating space in our body that we can like build a safe and loving home is something so many of us need. I know I need it, and I know I'm not alone. So